All the way back in 1994, Electronic Arts partnered up with the American motor magazine Road & Track to publish a racing simulator that was more realistic than every other game in the genre. Road & Track had just 2 years prior contributed to the development of test drive publisher Accolade's Formula 1 racer Grand Prix Unlimited, which made this new collaboration with EA a perfect fit since the gearheads over at Road & Track by now were somewhat familiar with the development cycle of a major video game title. Electronic Arts Canada gave their developing group Pioneer Productions the task to develop the game, and in the late summer of 1994, Road & Track presents The Need for Speed was released for the 3DO in the US. This would mark the release of the first game in one of video game history's most beloved franchises. The 3DO version of the game was released on the 31st of August 1994 and was the first ever version of the game released. Apparently EA didn't think that The Need for Speed was a subtitle that the Japanese racing fans would find appealing enough, since the game got renamed to Road & Track Presents Overdriving in Japan when the game was released over there on the 9th of December that same year. Oh, and for your own good, do not confuse Overdriving with a horrible 1991 Sega Genesis port of the classic arcade game with the also similar name Hard Driving, because that could be one of the worst ports that have ever been made. Upon its release, the game received positive reviews from various magazines, with Electronic Gaming Monthly writing, "This is by far the best looking racing for the 3DO", and with GamePro stating that, "With the stunning graphics and exotic sport cars in EA's phenomenal Need for Speed, you can blaze down the street until adrenaline overload wipes you out." The 3DO release of the Need for Speed is quite different from the later PC, PlayStation and Sega Saturn ports. For example, it only has 3 tracks to race on, each divided into 2 segments, and you can only race against one opponent. The extremely cringy racing beast by the name of X-Man. And I'm not joking, that is his actual name. We see this guy in numerous equally cringing live action videos approximately every 5 minutes. And this gets very tiring after a while, since there only is about 5 to 10 different videos in the game, and after about 20 minutes of playtime you've seen them all.
Prepare yourself for a turbocharged world of endless blacktop, where the winners reign in infamy and the losers are turned away by the thousands.
The game's 3 tracks is City, a 12-mile long highway with the scenery of a city in the background and a lot of traffic on the streets. The next track is called Coastal, and it's also about 12 miles long. It lets you race along the Florida coastline, while also taking you through the bumpy roads in the nearby mountains. The game's last course is titled Alpine, and it's set in the Alps. It features a lot of sharp turns and is probably the hardest out of the 3 maps. This map feels like it's tailor-made for the Lamborghini Diablo VT, but with that being said, this track is great with most of the game's 8 cars. Those 8 cars are all mid-90s sport cars: the Porsche 911 Carrera, the Chevrolet Corvette CR1, the Ferrari F12 TR, the Dodge Viper RT10, the Acura NSX, the Mazda RX-7, the Toyota Supra Turbo, and the aforementioned Lamborghini Diablo VT. Every car has detailed information about them written on the car information screen, and you're also able to see a 45-second long live action video of your car of choice driving to some 90s music and with some extremely outdated 90s editing. In other words, this is what most people, including me, would call pure car porn. The 3DO version of The Need for Speed is beautiful. The graphics are much greater than most other racing game at the time. The sound, just like the graphics, were amazing for its time and miles better than the competitors. The controls are your average 90s ratings controls, and they're all a bit tweaked. Nothing fancy, but definitely not bad. You can choose between 3 different camera angles, one that puts the camera in the driver's seat, one that's basically in front of the car, and one giving you the third-person view. But even though you can play the game from all of these 3 angles, the only one that's really playable is the camera angle from inside the car. What the game was mostly criticized for at the time of its release was the lack of tracks. Each track took about 8 minutes to complete or so, and if we do the math, that means that you only have about 3 hours of real game time, and that is assuming that you want to drive every car on every track. Most people waited for a sequel to drop with new tracks and new game modes, and this sort of happened, but not if you were that one person owning a 3DO. On August the 31st, 1995, exactly a year after the 3DO version of the game was released, the PC version of Road & Track Presents The Need for Speed hits the shelves. This version was very different from the 3DO release. The awful X-Men was now nowhere to be seen. Thank fucking Christ. 4 new game modes, 3 new tracks, the option to race against more than one opponent, multiplayer, an unlockable map, and an unlockable car were added to the game. The 3 old tracks were also changed quite a bit. With all these changes for the PC port, it's almost as if the 3DO version was a demo and the PC version was the actual game, although that was not the case. The biggest difference from the 3DO version was that the game now had 4 game modes instead of 1. The head-to-head mode was the same game mode as the one in the 3DO version, and it's the only game mode that features traffic and police pursuits in the PC version, but only if you choose one of the original 3DO tracks, since those are the only so-called road tracks in the game. Single Race is a game mode where you race against up to 7 opponents on either road tracks or circuit tracks. This is also the game mode in where you can choose between racing against a bunch of opponents with the same cars or against what's called the pack, in which everyone drives different cars. Time Trial is exactly what it sounds like, a game mode where you race against the clock to try and beat the race in a set amount of time. And let me tell you, it's by far the hardest game mode available. The last game mode is Tournament, in which you try to collect as many points as possible to succeed in a series of races on each track. If you manage to win the tournament, you unlock the bonus track Las Vegas and the fictional bonus car Warrior PTO E2. While playing Tournament, the tracks and cars are split up into 3 different categories. City and Rusty Springs Raceway, along with the cars Acura NSX, the Mazda RX-7 and the Toyota Supra, are all part of Class C. Coastal and Autumn Valley Speedway, along with Chevrolet Corvette CR1, the Porsche 911 Carrera and the Dodge Viper RT10 are part of Class B, and Class A consists of the tracks Alpine Valley and Vertigo Ridge, together with the Lamborghini Diablo VT and the Ferrari F12 TR. The 3 new tracks are so-called circuit tracks, meaning that they are all tracks that start and end in the same position after a couple of laps. The tracks are Rusty Springs Raceway, a 1.5 mile long oval-shaped track with only 4 corners and set in the barren desert. The second new track is Autumn Valley Speedway. It's a 3 mile long course with autumn-colored trees and giant inflatables as scenery. Vertigo Ridge is the game's last main track, and just like Autumn Springs Speedway, it's a 3 mile long track that is set on a mountain, but with a mountain chain as scenery. The 3 tracks that were featured in the 3DO release has been altered in this version to be a bit harder, and every track has now got an extra segment. My biggest problem with this is that the 3rd segment really ruins the track, since it sadly often feels like a completely different track racing wise. The game's final track is called Las Vegas, which is unlocked by winning the tournament. It is set in a Las Vegas inspired city and it's 3 miles long. Most of the additions that came with the PC version were indeed very good and vital for a longer game time. The only real problem I have with it is how extremely hard the game is, and this is because of the AI. Your opponents make next to 0 mistakes, meaning that if you do, you quickly end up last and it's extremely hard to get back in first place again, even if you make that mistake in the first 30 seconds of the race. This problem gets even more annoying if you play in a tournament or in a single race against the pack, because since every class of car has one car that's a little better than the others, that car always ends up winning. For example, it's almost impossible to win a Class C tournament race if you're using the Mazda RX-7, since at least 2 opponents is gonna use the Toyota Supra and they will always be faster than you. This combined with the fact that the AI doesn't make any mistakes basically means that if you're gonna have the slightest chance of winning a race, you must choose a specific car for each track. This leads to you only using about 3 cars while playing the game, which is a shame because the cars in this game are really well modeled and are all fun to drive. But when, or well, if you manage to win the tournament, you're going to unlock the fictional car Warrior PTO E2, and this is by far the fastest car in the game, so at this point this won't be a problem anymore. But with that being said, when you've gotten this far, you're feeling pretty done with the game. On the 20th of March 1996, the game returned to consoles in the form of a PlayStation port, and 3 months later the Sega Saturn port was released. In Japan, the PlayStation port was named Overdriving DX and promoted as a sequel to the original 3DO game. The truth is that the PlayStation and Sega Saturn port of the Need for Speed was nothing more than a direct port of the PC version for consoles. The menus had been changed to work better with a controller instead of mouse and keyboard, but from a gameplay standpoint the game was very similar to the PC release, but with a new HUD that was much easier to understand than the PC one. The graphics though were obviously a lot better on the PC release, since the PlayStation and Sega Saturn was way more limited than a PC. Apart from the new menu, racing HUD and the option of split screen racing, the only really new thing on the console port was the option to change the time of day when you were racing. You had the option to either race in the morning, midday or evening, with midday being the standard. While being a nice feature, it's not really something that seemed necessary, but with that said, the game looks really good while racing during sunrise. The console port of the game got mostly positive reviews, with Electronic Gaming Monthly giving the game 8.75 out of 10 while writing that the racing perspective really flies and its controls are excellent, and that enhanced details are shown in both cars and tracks. Maximum, the video game magazine, was a bit harsher, giving the title 2 out of 5 stars with the motivation that the cars feel too solid and there is never the feeling of speed fans of Ridge Racer experience. And later on in the review stating that players of this EA effort will be feeling a real need for speed. At some point in 1996, a special edition version of the game was released for the PC. This version contained LAN support, up to 8-player multiplayer, DirectX 2 API, Windows 95 support, time of day settings, as well as 2 new tracks. The 2 new tracks were Burnt Sienna, a 3-mile long track set in the barren desert with scenery of an abandoned old western town, a mine, and a cave. The other track was called Transdropolis, and it's possible that this track was made specifically to fuck me over. It's an extremely hard 3-mile long track, but it's set in an urban setting that traverses through a multi-story car park, industrial areas, and an airport. When the player had completed the tournament, a couple of variants of all the tracks were unlocked. Every track could now be raced in mirror or rally mode. In the mirrored gameplay, you raced on the track, but with a not so exciting twist that you start at the finish line and finish at the start line. In the rally mode, the track turns into dirt and you're basically drifting your way through the race. This was the last version of the game released for the European and American market, but the Japanese continued to milk every last penny out of that overdriving title. In the end of 1996, more specifically on the 20th of December, a localized version of the Need for Speed was released for the Sega Saturn in the Japanese market called Nissan Presents Overdriving GTR. Overdriving GTR was a standard Sega Saturn version of the Need for Speed but with quite a bit of changes. One example of this is that all tracks got renamed. Instead of being called City, Coastal, Alpine, Rusty Spring Speedway, Autumn Valley Speedway, and Vertical Ridge, the already obvious track names were changed to City Simulation, Ocean Simulation, Alpine Simulation, Desert Track, Mountain Track, and North Track. But that is by far not the biggest change made to the game. Not a single car from the original game is in this release, instead every car in the game is different Nissan models. And those being the Nissan 180SX Type X, the Nissan Fairlady 240CG and 300CX, the Nissan Skyline GTR BCNR33, the BNR32, KPGC 110, PGC10 and the Nissan Silvia case. Aside from the car changes and the track names, Overdriving GTR basically is the Sega Saturn version of the Need for Speed re-released with new skins. But guess what? The Japanese weren't done with the Need for Speed yet, because on the 10th of February 1997, 2.5 years after the first release of Road and Track Presents the Need for Speed, the final version of the game was released. Just like Overdriving GTR, this release also was relocalized for the Japanese market, and just like Overdriving GTR, this release only features Nissan cars. But unlike Overdriving GTR, this was a PlayStation release. This release was called Nissan Presents Overdriving Skyline Memorial, and as the name suggests, this game only features Nissan Skyline models. EA must have thought that everybody in Japan just loves Nissan cars. The game had the same tracks as the PlayStation version of the Need for Speed, but with the same names as the tracks in Overdriving GTR. Every Nissan Skyline model featured in Overdriving GTR were also present in the Skyline Memorial release, and those are the Nissan Skyline GTR R33, R32, KPG C110 and PGC 10. Apart from those, the game also features the Nissan Skyline HR31, KDR30, KHGC 211, S54B, and the Nissan R390. This release also featured some gameplay changes. The other releases of the Need for Speed had been very simulator-like in its car handling, but this time the game had a more arcade-like handling, which in my opinion really improved an already good game. But sadly, traffic and police units have been removed from this release, which truly is a shame. And with that, we've covered every single release of Road and Track Presents the Need for Speed. This game was, in my opinion, years before its time. Everything from the gameplay to tracks and car selection is something that I'd expect to see in a game released in the early 2000s, and not in the mid-90s. Of course it has its flaws. The game can be annoyingly hard at times thanks to the AI, and the crash animations are way too long, but it really isn't something that makes me not love this game. But with the game being released in 6 different versions, some obviously are better than others. If you want good graphics and a lot of different tracks, then the special edition for PC is the version for you. If you just want a really stripped down race game, then pick up the 3DO version, and if you love Nissan, then I guess you're gonna have to move to Japan. If I had to choose just one version of the game to play, it would probably be the 3DO version or the Skyline Memorial release for the PlayStation 1. The reason that I prefer the 3DO version to the PlayStation or PC release is that I'm of the opinion that the tracks are better constructed in the 3DO version. And the reason that I like Skyline Memorial so much is because I think that the arcade-like handling really improves the game, and it makes me want to play the game for longer periods of time. And that is it for now. See you next time. Have a great day. Bye.